Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I have my April wrap-up. We're in something of a different location today simply because the bench that I usually sit on is covered in books at the moment and piles of papers that I just do not want to move. So, I'm sat on my bed, you can still see a few books in the background. I hope that is going to assuage any feelings of book pornography that you might be searching for. I don't know. In April, I didn't read many books due to the fact that two of the books I was reading were quite large, and I won't be discussing them at much length here. The first of these is The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel. I read the first two books in the Thomas Cromwell series in March, and that lit a fire under me to go and read Hilary Mantel's back catalogue. This paperback edition didn't come out until last week, so I read the majority of this novel on my phone. That was an experience in itself. But as with last month, I want to do an entire video about the trilogy as a whole, and I'm currently writing down points on my computer so that I can discuss it wholeheartedly. Needless to say, this entire trilogy has actually thrilled me, and throughout the reading of this book, it felt somewhat voyeuristic because due to it being historical, I knew that that Thomas Cromwell will die at the end of it. And so there is this strange sense that you're watching a man's downfall, never certain of when it's going to happen. But Mantel also has to write this in this literary sense and has to make it compelling and has to follow certain conventions and rules of literature. So she has to almost turn history into a story in itself. Now, I'll leave all of my thoughts about that for the video, but do know that that's what's going to happen with this one. And that I did enjoy it, as I've enjoyed all of Hilary Mantel's books that I've read. That can't be said for The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. There is a video where I re-examined this book after 5 years since my first reading. I did not like this book upon a second reading, and I will be unhauling it, but do go and watch that video. I still think it's a good examination of grief, but there's a lot in here that I just didn't get on with this time around. Which means that I only have 3 books to talk about. Now, the first of these is The Abbess of Crewe by Muriel Spark. I read The Girls of Slender Means in March, and I want to continue to read the writers that I enjoy. Once I find a writer that I enjoy, I want to continue to read them and not leave it so long. So on my library app, I found this book. I was interested because it mentions Crewe, and that's where I went to uni. And this book is supposedly a retelling of the Watergate scandal using nuns as the figureheads for that story. And if you know the Watergate scandal, I don't, then I imagine you're going to get a lot more from this book than I did. Basically, the Abbeys of Crew has installed cameras and microphones all over the abbey in order to keep track of what the nuns are saying. And there is this nun who has escaped from the abbey and is telling her story, who was due to be the next abbess, but because of her forward-thinking views, they basically forced her into leaving the abbey. And now she's going across the world telling her side of the story. This is dark, but also there are tinges of humour there. It's black humour at its best. There's talk of feeding the nuns dog food because they won't know any different, whilst the top nuns, the abbess and her acolytes, squirrel themselves away and use the money that is being sent by the other nuns' families to live in the lap of luxury, really. It's an incredibly short book, and I read it in about an hour one morning. but I don't think it's one that I would revisit. I think that maybe if you were a Muriel Spark completist, this is where you'd go. I think she's funny enough and definitely prolific enough. And I think, again, that if you knew the Watergate scandal, then you'd find this book more humorous than I did. But I think it's a book where you need the context and you need the background knowledge in order to figure everything out and who's meant to be who and who's representative of who. And because I didn't have that knowledge, I constantly felt like I was kept at arm's length because I couldn't properly understand the humour. But, you know, it's a big historical event that most people understand the whys and wherefores, the ins and outs of. There's that one. Next we have It's Hard to Be Hip Over 30 by Judith Viorst, or Viorst. I never figured out how to say the name. An American poet. This collection is made up of It's Hard to Be Hip Over 30 and other tragedy. Oh, this is It's Hard to Be Hip Over 30, and then we have People and Other Aggravations. I was recording a vlog at the start of this month and nothing came of it, but basically I was at work and I saw this book, which is a Persephone classic, and they so rarely come into the charity shop that I purchased it immediately. It's poetry, and it's poetry that I don't necessarily have the sense of humour for. It is a classic, probably, in America. You'll have to let me know. It's humorous tales examining married life and life with children. And I imagine if you're a certain type of person, these poems will thrill you for their insight. You'll find them delightfully humorous. There is a part of me that felt like I should adore these poems because Victoria Wood did something similar by taking ordinary situations and making them humorous. However, I didn't get the rhythm of these, and some of the rhyme scheme it didn't work for me. There were moments that I found humorous. There were poems that I really liked, but I didn't really care about it, and I found it really forgettable. And ordinarily, I would read a poetry collection from cover to cover as though it were a normal book, then go back and pick out favourites. But I put this book down often because I found myself somewhat bored. But it's very much a case of I don't think that I am the reader of these poems. I don't think I'm the what's the word? What am I looking for? The target audience? I don't think I am the target audience for these poems, and I just didn't end up enjoying it, so it'll be going back. So yeah. Then I read Kumukanda by Kayo Chigonyi, and this is a poetry collection that I have wanted to read for years, and I saw it was available on the library app, so downloaded it immediately, read immediately, and discovered some of my favourite poetry. I am very particular when it comes to my likes and dislikes in poetry, as I think anyone who reads poetry is really. I'm not an anomaly, but something I like is how language is played with. I like half rhyme, I like sibilants. For me, poetry is very much about the way it would sound when being read. Oftentimes, with the poems here, I found myself astounded by the way that sound was utilised and the words that were put together, the rhymes that were being made. If there were rhymes there, sometimes it was a nice bit of assonance, sibilance that got me. There's alliteration, there's great use of form. The poems never shied away from theme, if that makes sense. I find it difficult to talk about a collection as a whole, but because, as I say, for me, poetry is entirely subjective, and what I didn't like in the Judith Viorst collection is, again, based on my own subjectivity and my likes and wants when it comes to reading poetry. And yet with Kumukanda, I found that everything I liked to see in poetry was here. It was a collection that I wanted for my own shelves. I adored it. I don't know that I can think of anything else to say. other than if you were looking for a poetry collection to read, then this is one to look out for, because it did everything I wanted it to. I felt so engaged by the poems, and every time I would finish one, I couldn't allow it to sit. I couldn't mull over them because I had to move on. And each time I read the next poem, it would be like finding a new favourite. I would read a poem and think, oh, this is great, this can't be topped, and then it would be. And it was a great way of setting out a poetry collection as well, because I don't know that many readers think about the way in which poetry collections are put together. Oftentimes it can have the same impact as a novel in the way a collection is structured. Poems on similar themes, putting them together, still having something a bit climactic towards the end and then a denouement. You could have say you wanted a really climactic, hard-hitting poem as the second to last poem, the penultimate poem, and then you went into something more quiet, or vice versa. It's just everything about Kumukanda was brilliant, thought out and thought-provoking, and is a collection that I basically want everyone to read, and I will be looking to get a copy for my own shelves. And I also look forward to anything this poet puts out in future. I believe they do have another collection coming out later this year, and I am thrilled by that prospect. I cannot lie. But that's it. That's all I read this month. Well, last month. I started reading In a Summer Season by Elizabeth Taylor and hope to finish that. And I had great plans for everything that I wanted to read last month, but it just didn't happen. It's very difficult. I went back to work this month, and we got the new dog this month, and I was already reading a 940-page novel and an 863-page novel, so I wasn't going to read much more than that. I'm really finding it hard to be fussed by the idea that I haven't read a lot by other people's estimations. I don't need to go into a ratio of what I liked versus what I disliked. I don't need to compare myself against any other booktubers who may or may not have read more than me in the last month. I am quite happy with what I did, and if you've read any of these books, then please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and until next time, well, that is all.